In the most secret archives of the Vatican, buried among documents that the Catholic Church has kept hidden for almost 300 years, lies a file stamped with the seal of maximum heresy, a classification reserved only for the most disturbing cases in ecclesiastical history. The document recounts events that took place in the Convent of Santa Clara in Monterrey, Mexico, between 1720 and 1745. It tells the story of a young Franciscan nun whose real name was erased from every official record. The only thing we know is that the church authorities called her the Seer. She possessed a gift so terrifying that the church not only condemned her, but decided to erase her existence from history. The manuscript includes testimonies of events so disturbing that 3 Vatican investigators who studied it requested to be immediately transferred to other dioceses. The last investigator who had access to the file wrote a single line in his final report before disappearing without a trace. Asterisk, some secrets should remain buried forever. Asterisk, today for the first time, we will reveal what truly happened in that cursed convent of Monterrey. What you're about to hear is not for everyone. This is not a channel for the faint of heart, but for that small elite of fearless seekers of truth who do not look away, no matter how terrifying the truth may be. If you've come this far, you've already shown that you're not like most people. So before we dive into a story that has kept theologians awake for centuries, subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments which city you're listening from. Because once you know the truth about the Seer of Monterrey, you will never look at convents the same way again. Asterisco Monterrey, 1720. A city that breathed the aroma of both wealth and death in equal measure. The silver mines and its surroundings attracted Spaniards, Creoles, and mestizos seeking fortune, but they also awakened forces that should have remained dormant. Monterrey was literally built on blood. Many of its most important buildings stood on top of ancient ceremonial centers of the native peoples, places where, for centuries, rituals had been carried out that Spanish conquistadors tried to erase from memory. The very air of Monterrey seemed charged with a supernatural electricity. Old residents whispered about nights when the wind carried wails that did not sound human, and about shadows that moved with no body to cast them. Merchants arriving from other cities claimed that their animals refused to enter certain neighborhoods after dusk, and that candles would snuff out for no reason in specific streets. And among all the constructions in the city, none commanded as much respect and fear as the Convent of Santa Clara. Built in 1670 on land, once described in native records as the place where the dead speak to the living, the convent rose like a fortress of gray stone, seeming to absorb the sunlight instead of reflecting it. Its walls, nearly 2 meters thick, were built with stones taken from destroyed pre-Hispanic temples. Some masons swore that during construction, they heard voices emanating from the very stones. The convent structure was deliberately labyrinthine. Corridors curved at strange angles. Stairways led to places that made no architectural sense, and there were basements that did not appear in the original blueprints. Spanish builders had tried to follow the traditional European design, but something in the land itself seemed to reject Christian geometry, forcing unsettling modifications. The 40 Franciscan nuns who lived in Santa Clara had, over 5 decades, developed their own rituals to cope with the peculiarities of their home. They never walked the corridors alone after 9 at night. They avoided certain sectors of the basement where the temperature dropped inexplicably and where footsteps echoed as though more people were walking than were actually present. And all of them, without exception, had learned to ignore the whispers in unknown tongues that sometimes seeped from the empty cells. On the morning of March 15th, 1720, a thick fog shrouded Monterrey like a funeral shroud. Mother Superior Isabel de Santa Maria, a 50-year-old woman whose severe face hid a sharp mind and an intuition that bordered on the supernatural, was reviewing the convent's account books when she heard knocking at the main door. It was unusual for anyone to arrive so early, especially with the fog making travel dangerous. When the gatekeeper, Sister Elena, opened the door, she found a fragile-looking young woman, soaked from a mist and trembling from the cold. She wore peasant clothes, humble but carefully mended, and her eyes, so pale a green they looked almost transparent, carried a depth that clashed with her youthful appearance. "Good morning, sister," the young woman whispered. "My name is Esperanza Morales. I have come seeking refuge in the house of God." When Mother Isabel met her an hour later, she would later describe the moment in her personal diary as the most unsettling encounter of my religious life. The young woman claimed to be 23 years old, though she looked younger. She possessed a presence that was at once calming and deeply unsettling. She spoke with the humility expected of a peasant seeking refuge. Yet at times her eyes gleamed with an intelligence that seemed to hold knowledge far beyond her social station. Her story was tragic, but not unusual for the time. Her parents had died the previous year during a yellow fever epidemic on the outskirts of Monterrey. Her father, Joaquin Morales, had been a blacksmith, renowned in the region for forging tools that lasted for generations. Her mother, Remedios, had been a healer, a woman who knew the secrets of medicinal plants, respected both by Spanish settlers and local indigenous people. "My mother taught me many things before she died," Esperanza explained as she sipped an herbal tea prepared by Sister Catalina. "Knowledge of plants and other things my father said were better left forgotten. But one cannot forget what runs in the blood." At that moment, Mother Isabel noticed the room's temperature drop several degrees. The candles flickered, though no wind stirred. For the briefest instant, she thought she heard distant whispers echoing somewhere deep within the convent. After 2 days of prayer and deliberation, Mother Isabel accepted Esperanza as a novice. Years later, in her final confession, she would admit that her decision had been influenced by recurring dreams in which she saw the young woman walking the convent halls, not as a guest, but as if she had always belonged there. Thus, Esperanza was baptized into religious life as Sister Esperanza de la Cruz. From her first days, she adapted to convent life with uncanny ease, astonishing the other sisters. She seemed to know the schedules, routines, even the most efficient paths through the convent's maze-like architecture, as though she had lived there all her life. During her first 2 years, Sister Esperanza distinguished herself with small miracles that were initially welcomed with gratitude. She had an extraordinary ability to predict the weather. She knew exactly when the torrential summer rains would strike Monterrey, when drought would set in, and when the northern winds would bring unusual cold. The convent's gardeners soon learned to consult her before planting or harvesting. But her foresight went beyond weather. She knew when important visitors would arrive, days in advance. She predicted the Bishop of Guadalajara's visit a full week before his arrival, specifying that he would be accompanied by 3 priests, one of them suffering from stomach illness. When the episcopal entourage arrived exactly as she had described, the bishop himself requested to meet her. "My child," the bishop asked in a private audience, "how do you receive these revelations?" Esperanza knelt with her eyes lowered. Her voice was humble and free of pride. "Your Excellency, I don't know if they are revelations. I simply see images, as though God opens windows in my mind to show me his will." The bishop, a learned man who had studied theology in Rome, was impressed not only by her predictions, but also by the way she spoke of them. She seemed genuinely perplexed by her own gift, as if it were a burden she had simply learned to carry. Beyond her predictions, Esperanza showed remarkable compassion toward the sick sisters. She seemed to know instinctively which herbs to use for different ailments, knowledge she credited to her mother's teachings. Sister Pilar, who had suffered chronic headaches for years, found complete relief after Esperanza prepared an infusion from plants grown in the convent's courtyard. And yet, some observant sisters began to notice peculiarities. They often saw Esperanza walking the halls in the earliest hours of morning, always heading toward the stairs that led down to the basements. When asked what she was doing, she answered that she was praying for the souls that had suffered on that land. One nun in particular, Sister Carmen Delgado, a practical woman of 40 with a skeptical mind, was the first to quietly voice her doubts. "Don't you think it's strange," she whispered to a few others, "that our sister always knows exactly where to find the herb she needs, even ones that do not grow naturally in Monterrey?" But such doubts were never spoken openly, for in those early years, Sister Esperanza seemed to bring only blessings to Santa Clara. The convent's crops flourished as they hadn't in decades. The usual outbreaks of disease that struck religious communities seemed to bypass them. Harmony among the sisters reached a level that even the oldest nuns could not recall experiencing before. That peace, however, would not last. Everything changed on the night of September 15th, 1722. That night, September 15th, 1722, Monterrey was lashed by a storm of unusual violence. Lightning fell so often it seemed as though the sky itself were at war, and the wind moaned against the convent's walls like the cries of the dead. The sisters had retired to their cells early, but the relentless thunder made sleep impossible. At 3 a.m, as the storm reached its peak, a scream pierced the convent like a dagger. It was not the cry of someone frightened by thunder, but something far deeper, the cry of someone who had seen the very face of death. Mother Isabel was the first to reach Sister Esperanza's cell, followed by Sister Carmen and others who had been jolted awake. They found the young nun seated on the edge of her cot, her body convulsing violently, her eyes rolled completely white. The seizures lasted nearly 10 minutes, during which Esperanza muttered words in an unknown language. It was not Latin, not Spanish, nor any tongue they recognized. They were guttural, primal sounds, as though dredged from some cavern deep within her being. At last she fell still. Her youthful innocence seemed gone, replaced by a heavy, ancient gravity in her gaze. "Mother," she rasped, her voice hoarse from screaming, "I have seen something that should not exist in God's world." "What have you seen, child?" asked Mother Isabel, though part of her already dreaded the answer. Esperanza rose slowly from the cot. Her voice returned to normal, but her words chilled the room. "Of all present, I have seen the death of Sister Margarita de Los Angeles. It will happen tomorrow, at exactly 4:30 in the afternoon. I saw her fall from the bell tower stairs. But it was no accident, Mother. Something pushed her, something I could not see, but that was waiting for her." She paused, then continued with a tremor in her voice. "I saw her final moment with terrifying clarity. Her head will strike the 3rd step from the bottom. Her neck will snap instantly. And before she dies, she will see someone standing at the foot of the stairs, someone she knows, someone she trusts. And in her last breath, she will realize that person wanted her dead." The sisters listened in horror as Esperanza described impossible details. The exact sound the body would make as it fell. The words Sister Margarita would try to speak, but choke upon. The expression of terror and comprehension that would twist her face. "And when it is over," Esperanza concluded, "they will find something on the stair where she fell. Something that should not be there. Something someone placed deliberately." That night, Mother Isabel did not sleep. She wrestled with faith and reason, torn between believing Esperanza's vision or dismissing it as a nightmare born of the storm. Yet the precision of her description gnawed at her soul. By the next day, she resolved to take precautions without alarming Sister Margarita. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, she accompanied the 62-year-old nun, who daily climbed the bell tower to ring the evening prayer bells, under the pretense of inspecting the ropes. But just before they reached the top, Sister Catalina rushed in, begging Mother Isabel's help with a novice badly burned in the kitchen. Torn by duty, Isabel descended, leaving Sister Margarita alone. At exactly 4:30, a scream tore through the convent. When the sisters arrived, they found Sister Margarita lying lifeless at the foot of the stairs. Her neck was twisted at an impossible angle, her head resting against the 3rd step, exactly as Esperanza had foretold. Her eyes were open, fixed on a point at the base of the stairs, frozen in a look of horror and realization that chilled all who saw it. And on the step where she had slipped was a strange, oily substance, slick as oil, but without scent, evaporating at the touch. Even more disturbing, Sister Carmen pointed to something else, barefoot footprints in the dust at the base of the stairs. They were not Margarita's. She had worn shoes. They did not belong to any of the sisters present. Small, like those of a young woman, they were perfectly dry, though the upper step was damp with the strange substance. The prophecy had come to pass. The funeral of Sister Margarita was held 3 days later. It was marked by a grief heavier than any the convent had known in years. Not only sorrow for a beloved sister, but dread at the eerie precision with which her death had been foretold. During the vigil, the nuns prayed beside her coffin in small groups. None dared remain alone with the body. The atmosphere was so charged that the hair on their arms rose, as if death itself were palpably present. And yet, Sister Esperanza insisted on spending the entire night alone in vigil beside Margarita's coffin. Mother Isabel opposed at first, but the young nun pleaded with such determination that it was impossible to refuse. "I need to ask her forgiveness," Esperanza said through tears. "I feel that by seeing her death, I somehow became part of it. Her soul must know I never wished to witness her suffering." At midnight, Sister Carmen, restless with anxiety, decided to check on Esperanza in the chapel. What she saw through the half-open door would haunt her for the rest of her life. Esperanza knelt beside the coffin, but she was not praying in any familiar way. Her lips moved rapidly, whispering words in the same guttural, unknown language she had spoken during her convulsions. The candles around the coffin flickered in strange patterns, as though answering her chant. More disturbing still, she seemed to be conversing with someone. She paused at times, as if listening to a response, occasionally nodding or shaking her head. At one moment, Carmen swore she heard a second voice in the chapel. Faint, but undeniably there. When Esperanza finally rose to leave, she stopped beside the coffin and whispered something Carmen heard clearly. "I understand, sister. I will do as you ask." The next day, during the burial, Father Francisco remarked that he had never seen a body so serene after such a violent death. Sister Margarita looked at peace, as if she had found a resolution denied to her in life. But for Sister Carmen, the image of that midnight vigil and the whispered promise would never fade. Months passed after Sister Margarita's burial, but the Convent of Santa Clara never returned to peace. The sisters moved cautiously through the halls, rarely alone, constantly glancing over their shoulders as if unseen eyes followed them. Esperanza, meanwhile, seemed drawn into a deeper state of contemplation. She spent as many as 18 hours a day in prayer, often in positions that defied human endurance. She ate only enough to survive, Her skin grew so pale it seemed almost translucent in candlelight, yet her eyes burned with an intensity that unsettled all who saw her. March 15th, 1723. Exactly 6 months after Sister Margarita's death, another night of screams shook the convent awake. The cries from Esperanza's cell were even more harrowing than before, as though what she saw in her vision was unbearable even to witness. When the sisters burst into her chamber, they recoiled in horror. Blood streamed from her eyes like crimson tears, staining her white habit. Her hands clutched the sheets so tightly that her knuckles turned white, her body arching in spasms that seemed to break the limits of human anatomy. For nearly 20 minutes, she alternated between screams of agony and whispers in that unknown, guttural tongue. Some of the sisters swore they heard other voices answering her whispers, though no one else was speaking. At last, she fell still. For several minutes, she lay unmoving, her breath so shallow she seemed close to death. When she opened her eyes again, they were filled with a sorrow so profound it moved several sisters to tears. "I have seen something even more terrible," she whispered in a voice aged by decades of grief. "Sister Beatrice will die during Sunday Massachusetts, but her death will be different." Sister Beatriz Hernandez was the youngest novice after Esperanza, a cheerful 20-year-old from Saltillo with a voice so angelic she had been named lead singer of the choir. She was loved by all for her joy and ability to find humor even in the convent's most mundane tasks. "I saw her take communion," Esperanza continued, tears mingling with the blood still trickling from her eyes. "But the chalice, it did not hold only consecrated wine. There was something else, something that turned the sacrament into poison. I saw her collapse before the altar. Her lips turned blue as winter sky, her eyes filled with blood like mine are now. Her last thought was a prayer to the Virgin Mary, one she could not finish." The description that followed was even more horrific than the first. Esperanza described not only the physical agony, the metallic taste in Beatrice's mouth, the burning rising from her stomach to her throat, the creeping darkness overtaking her vision, but also her inner terror, her desperate attempt to form a final prayer. And when they examined the chalice afterward, Esperanza concluded, they will find traces of something that should never exist in God's house. Something placed there with intent and premeditation. Her words left the convent frozen in dread. A prophecy too precise, too vivid to dismiss. Mother Isabel spent the days leading up to Sunday torn between disbelief and terror. Part of her wanted to dismiss Esperanza's vision as the guilt-ridden hallucinations of a disturbed mind. But another part, growing louder with each hour, feared something far darker was unfolding in Santa Clara. This time, she resolved to take active precautions. On Saturday night, she personally oversaw the preparation of the Mass wine. She chose a fresh, sealed bottle blessed by the bishop on his last visit. She washed and consecrated the chalice with her own hands, then locked it away in the sacristy. She even rearranged the duties so that Sister Beatrice would not approach the altar during Massachusetts. Instead, she would remain safe in the choir. Sunday dawned clear, but the air carried an ominous stillness. Pigeons avoided the convent towers, dogs barked ceaselessly, and townsfolk later claimed their cats hid indoors, refusing to emerge. Mass began as usual. Father Francisco presided with his customary solemnity, while Sister Beatrice led the choir, her voice soaring heavenward. Yet sensitive ears noticed something odd. The acoustics seemed different, the voices echoing too long, as if the stone walls themselves were whispering back. Everything proceeded without incident until the consecration. As Father Francisco lifted the chalice, A beam of sunlight pierced the stained glass, illuminating the wine so that it seemed to glow with its own light. But later, witnesses would remark that the liquid was not the usual ruby red of wine, but darker, tinged with something unsettling. When communion began, the sisters approached in their usual order. Mother Isabel felt relief watching Beatrice remain in the choir, still directing the hymns. But just as the last nun received communion, something happened that no one could have foreseen. Beatrice stopped singing. Her face took on a look of mystical ecstasy. Without a word, she stepped from the choir and walked toward the altar with slow, deliberate steps, as if drawn by an unseen hand. Mother Isabel tried to stop her, grabbing her arm. But Beatrice's skin was icy, as though her blood no longer flowed. "I must receive communion," she murmured, in a voice not entirely her own. "He is calling me. I can hear him." Confused, Father Francisco hesitated with the chalice. But Beatrice's eyes blazed with such unnatural intensity that resistance was impossible. "Father, please," she whispered. "I need to partake. It is urgent." At 11:43, exactly as Esperanza had foretold, Beatrice took the chalice from the priest's hands and drank the remaining wine. The effect was immediate and horrific. First, her face twisted in bewilderment, as though the taste were utterly foreign. Then her eyes flew wide, and from her throat erupted a sound that was neither scream nor word, but something primitive and animal. Her lips darkened to a deep, spreading blue, the color creeping inward from the corners of her mouth as though venom traced the course of her veins. She clutched the altar, nails gouging the carved wood, her body convulsing violently. Her warm brown eyes flooded red until they looked like liquid rubies in her pale face. "Virgin, Santa Maria," she tried to whisper, but her words were drowned by a pink froth bubbling from her lips. Father Francisco rushed to steady her. But when she looked at him, it was with a terror so raw that he would wake screaming from it for months. "Father, I am not alone in my body." Moments later, Sister Beatrice collapsed before the altar, just as Esperanza had predicted. But her agony lasted longer than the vision had shown. For nearly 10 minutes, her body writhed with violent spasms, and from her mouth spilled sounds no human throat should ever produce. When she finally lay still, her eyes remained open, fixed on the chapel ceiling. Several sisters followed her gaze and swore they saw a shadow move among the rafters, though nothing was there to cast it. The chalice was preserved for study. Later, when Father Francisco examined it with a city physician, they made chilling discoveries. Residue of the wine contained a substance the doctor could not identify. It was no known poison, yet under the crude microscope of the time, it appeared to move of its own accord, forming patterns like ancient symbols. More terrifying still, it reacted violently to sacred objects. When a crucifix was held near the chalice, the residue bubbled, releasing a greenish smoke that stank of sulfur and something worse. Not the stench of recent death, but the foul breath of centuries-old graves. Sister Beatrice's body revealed even greater horrors. Her internal organs showed decay that should have taken weeks, but had occurred in minutes. Her blood had thickened into a viscous gel, forming geometric patterns in her veins. And in her cell, hidden beneath her mattress, they found a small glass vial of white powder, an herbal mixture prepared with knowledge far beyond ordinary healing. When Esperanza was confronted, her reply was as chilling as the find itself. "God showed me where to find it," she said calmly. "In my nightly prayers, he revealed that Sister Beatrice had been experimenting with things she should never have touched. The vial was proof of her corruption. Mother Isabel felt the ground vanish beneath her. Are you saying Sister Beatrice poisoned herself? Esperanza's eyes filled with sorrow that seemed centuries old. I'm saying there are forces in this place older than our prayers, Mother. Forces that call to weak souls and consume them from within. Beatrice, her death was a release. After Beatrice's death, silence fell upon Santa Clara. But it was not peace. It was the suffocating silence of fear. The sisters avoided speaking of what had happened, yet the weight of it pressed down on every prayer, every song, every meal taken in uneasy quiet. For many, the terror was doubled by the fact that Esperanza had foretold it all with unbearable precision. Some saw her as chosen by God, blessed with visions meant to guide them through evil times. But others, most notably Sister Carmen, suspected something far darker. She doesn't predict death, Carmen whispered to Mother Isabel one evening. She brings it, like a herald, or worse, its cause. Mother Isabel tried to silence such talk, but doubts gnawed at her too. Weeks later, another vision came. This time, Esperanza did not scream or convulse. Instead, she entered the refectory during supper, pale and trembling, as though she had just seen a specter. Her voice quivered as she spoke. Sister Inés de la Soledad will die at dawn tomorrow. I saw her body in the cloister garden, her face disfigured, her skin burned as if by fire. Sister Inés, 65 years old, had been the convent's gentle herbalist, a woman incapable of malice. The sisters begged Esperanza to retract her words, but she only wept, repeating, "It is already written." That night, no one slept. Inés herself, calm and resigned, prayed quietly in the chapel. At dawn, the convent shook with a cry of horror. Her body was discovered in the garden, just as described. Her skin was blistered, blackened as though scorched by flames. But there had been no fire. Her hands clutched a rosary so tightly that the beads had fused to her flesh. Even more chilling, the soil beneath her body was covered in strange markings, symbols burned into the earth, still smoldering with heat no one could explain. From that moment, paranoia consumed Santa Clara. The nuns whispered that death itself walked the halls, choosing victims at will. Some began to believe Esperanza was not a messenger of God, but a vessel for something far older and crueler. Whenever she entered a room, conversations died. Some sisters crossed themselves, others fled entirely. Mother Isabel, torn between faith and reason, tried to keep the convent united, but she too was haunted by the feeling that something beyond human comprehension had taken root within their walls. The city outside began to notice as well. Monterrey's people whispered of dark omens surrounding the convent. Flocks of crows circling endlessly, bells ringing at night with no one in the tower, shadows glimpsed through barred windows where no one should be. And then, in the summer of 1724, came the most terrifying vision yet, one that no prayer, no confession, no exorcism could ever erase. July 1724. For several weeks, the atmosphere in Santa Clara had been suffocating. The sisters rarely spoke aloud, moving like shadows through the corridors. Some had developed fevers. Others trembled at night from nightmares too vivid to be only dreams. Then, one night, a shriek shattered the uneasy silence. The sisters rushed to Esperanza's cell, only to find her floating a few inches above her bed. Her body arched backward in a grotesque bow, arms extended as if crucified. Her eyes were rolled white, her hair hung downward, and from her throat poured a sound unlike anything human, an endless moan, low and resonant, vibrating the very stones of the convent. The air itself seemed to crackle with force. Candles guttered and died. Doors slammed open though no wind blew. In the cloister, the fountain's water bubbled and spilled over as though boiling. The nuns fell to their knees in terror, some covering their ears, others sobbing uncontrollably. Only Mother Isabel dared to approach, pressing a crucifix to Esperanza's chest. At once, the levitation ceased. Esperanza collapsed onto the bed, writhing, her mouth foaming with blood. Then she stilled, and in a voice both hers and not hers, she spoke. "I have seen the end." Her words spilled out in a torrent, filling the sisters with despair. "I saw not one death, but many. I saw every one of you, each sister of Santa Clara, lying lifeless in these halls. Some strangled, some burned, some drowned in the fountain you love so much. I saw the convent itself collapse into the ground, swallowed like a tomb. And above it all, I heard laughter. Laughter not of man, not of woman, but of something ancient, older than these stones, older than the prayers we have uttered." Her voice dropped to a whisper, yet somehow every ear in the room heard her clearly. "It is not death that comes for us. It is what feeds on death." The sisters broke into wailing. Some begged her to stop, others shouted for exorcism. But Esperanza continued, her eyes glowing faintly in the candlelight. "I saw the seal broken. I saw what the Spaniards tried to bury beneath this place. It waits. It feeds. It grows stronger with every soul that dies here." At that, her body convulsed one final time. She fell unconscious, breathing shallowly, her pulse barely perceptible. Mother Isabel ordered constant prayer over her, but the damage was done. The prophecy had spread like fire through the convent, and none could unhear it. From that day forward, Santa Clara was no longer merely a convent. It became a waiting room for death. And every sister knew, sooner or later, her name would be the next spoken by Esperanza Morales, the Seer of Monterrey. News of the horrors at Santa Clara could not be contained within Monterrey's walls. Merchants, travelers, even priests passing through began carrying rumors north and south. They spoke of a convent where death walked in plain sight, where a young nun predicted every passing soul with chilling accuracy, and where shadows moved as if alive. By early 1725, word had reached the Archbishop of Mexico City. Alarmed, he dispatched a secret report to Rome, addressed to the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, the institution responsible for investigating heresy. The Vatican's response was swift. Within months, 2 emissaries of the Holy Office arrived in Monterrey. Father Antonio da Urbina, an inquisitor of Castilian blood known for his rigid orthodoxy, and Father Matteo di Rossi, an Italian Jesuit scholar with a reputation for delving into matters of mysticism and the occult. Their arrival shook the convent to its foundations. From the very first night, the inquisitors noticed what the sisters had long grown used to: unnatural sounds echoing through the walls, doors that opened by themselves, and the oppressive sensation of being watched. Father Antonio dismissed it as hysteria and superstition. "The devil thrives on fear," he proclaimed sternly. "What we face here is not a miracle, but a deception meant to corrode faith." Father Matteo, however, was less certain. He recorded meticulous notes in Latin, describing fluctuations in temperature, strange markings in the stones, and the unnatural behavior of animals around the convent. He warned Antonio, "This may not be the devil we are accustomed to naming, but something older, something that wears many masks." The sisters were summoned, one by one, to testify. Most trembled, unable to speak coherently of what they had seen. Some broke down in tears, begging never to be left alone with Esperanza again. Others defended her fiercely, swearing she was chosen by God to guide them. When Esperanza herself was brought before them, she knelt with serenity. her pale green eyes fixed on the inquisitors, calm but piercing. "I did not seek these visions," she told them. "They come unbidden, and I bear them as a cross. If they are from God, may His will be done. If not, then I am the most tormented of souls." Father Antonio saw in her words the mark of a clever deceiver. Father Mateo, on the other hand, felt the weight of truth in her tone. That night, he confided to his journal, "She is either the holiest woman I have ever met, or the most dangerous." The Vatican men resolved to stay in Monterrey until they uncovered the truth. But as weeks passed, the deaths continued. Sister Clara suffocated in her sleep, found with her mouth filled with black soil. Sister Juliana was discovered at dawn, drowned in the cloister fountain, though the water was scarcely waist-high. And each time, Esperanza had spoken their names the day before. The inquisitors realized with horror that the convent was not merely cursed. It was feeding something, and the question was no longer whether Esperanza was saint or witch. The question was whether anyone in Santa Clara would survive long enough for the church to decide. The question was no longer whether Esperanza was saint or witch. The question was whether anyone in Santa Clara would survive. The final night, August 12th, 1725. At dusk, Father Antonio ordered every sister confined to her cell, determined to end what he called a theater of blasphemy. He prepared to conduct a solemn exorcism on Esperanza, with Father Mateo assisting reluctantly. But as midnight approached, the convent itself seemed to resist. The bells rang on their own, though no rope was touched. The walls vibrated with a low hum, like the heartbeat of some buried creature. In her cell, Esperanza writhed in agony, crying that the ground beneath them was breaking open. "It is awake," she screamed. "It was never asleep, and now it wants us all." Suddenly, a fissure split the chapel floor. From it poured a stench so foul the sisters gagged and fainted. Shapes moved in the darkness below, not bodies but shadows with substance, writhing like smoke given flesh. The sisters panicked. Some tried to flee. Others clung to crucifixes, praying desperately. Father Antonio shouted prayers of exorcism, his voice cracking. But the more he prayed, the louder the laughter became, that same ancient laughter Esperanza had described. One by one, the sisters fell. Some struck down by unseen hands. Others dragged, screaming, into the fissure. The cloister fountain overflowed with blood. The walls of the convent seemed to bleed. Father Antonio himself was found days later outside the convent walls, his eyes burned away, his tongue missing. His final words scrawled in blood on his cassock, * non est diabolus. * This is not the devil. Father Mateo survived, though how remains unclear. His secret report, smuggled back to Rome, described a massacre in detail. He wrote that Esperanza vanished that night, her body never found, though several sisters swore they saw her walking calmly into the fissure as though returning to where she belonged. The Vatican classified the case under maximum heresy and ordered all records sealed. The Convent of Santa Clara was abandoned, its ruins left to crumble. Monterrey's citizens avoided the site, calling it cursed ground. In time, the convent was erased from maps. Its stones were dismantled to build other churches and homes. And yet, locals whispered that in certain houses, the walls weep blood on stormy nights. In others, voices chant in guttural tongues when no one is present. Of Sister Esperanza Morales, nothing official remains. No portrait, no grave, no relic. But some say her pale green eyes still wander Monterrey, seen in reflections of windows or pools of water. Others claim to dream of her, whispering their names before tragedy strikes. And every few decades, when another storm lashes the city with unnatural fury, old families murmur the same warning. The Seer of Monterrey has returned, and she remembers the names of the dead,